my channel. This is Tracy Donegan. So as part of setting up this podcast, I decided that I would do some opinion pieces or just share some research that's new research that's happening around the world that is interesting to me, so it might be interesting to some of my viewers as well. So this was quite the week. I want to share it's just some interactions that I've had with the last couple of days with some providers in Ireland, and I guess to share my take on how this whole interaction proceeded. So bear with me. Back in February, Professor Jenny Gamble shared a piece of research on perinatal outcomes after regional anaesthesia. So this was February when Professor Jenny Gamble shared this. I can't even remember if I actually sat down and really read through the paper, but I think some of the main findings were, and totally nothing unusual here, that epidurals are associated with longer second stage, so longer pushing, more instrumentals, and this is not new research. Well, it is new research, but it's not new findings. We've seen plenty of research that there are potential trade-offs to epidurals, and that's just without a doubt. And anyone that says there are no drawbacks to epidurals isn't being honest with you. So GP Sarah Brennan, I think, is out in Galway. Hi, Sarah. Tagged me and several other organisations, Irish organisations involved in kind of the birth world about this piece of research. So this was back in February. Okay, so I think on Thursday, there was a reply to this is all happening on X, on Twitter. Dr Aif and I hope I got that right, responded saying, "There is absolutely nothing wrong in women availing of an epidural to manage labour pain. The study you linked above is inherently flawed and suffers from confounding by indication. Women shouldn't be scared away from effective and safe analgesic options, and their experience should not be belittled if they choose an epidural. Confounding by indication is likely a huge issue here." And Dr. Aif, I completely agree with you, 100%. And if you know anything about gentle birth, you'll know that we include lots of information about epidurals, the pros and the cons, but we also include some of our meditations for preparing for your epidural. Another really lovely recording for post-epidural, so that mom can be resting and keeping her mind relaxed as well as her body, now that she has some really good pain management on board. So when it comes to birth, a positive birth is whatever mom says it is, and that can be with an epidural, without, swing it from the trees. No argument from me. Completely agree with you there. Women should not be judged about their pain management options, and there is a lot of shame around that, and it's something that we actually, again, tackle within the gentle birth program. So that interaction could have ended right there on Twitter. But then Dr. Aif shared his podcast stating that parents should listen to this episode of the Baby Tribe podcast to get a balanced and evidence-based appraisal of delivering in a maternity hospital. So look, I love podcasts, so off I went to have a listen. And I listened to the full episode, and I recommend you do the same, as I did post earlier on this week saying, please, everyone, go have a listen to this. So on Thursday, I shared on my social media a clip and encouraging parents to listen to the full episode. So the first part of the podcast is actually really, really good. It is reassuring, I think, as Dr. Aif is talking with his partner, and she is an anaesthetist in the same hospital. So they're both talking about, the big transition to parenthood, and there is no doubt it's difficult for everybody, but it is nice to see that, nobody escapes, no matter where you are in life, what your walk of life is. The transition to parenthood can be really, really difficult. So I think the beginning of the podcast was, it was reassuring, quite positive for parents. But this whole idea of, again, notions and this narrative that Dr. Aif talks about prompted me to reply to Dr. Aif directly. And my reply was, are you suggesting this notion of a growing narrative that women are disempowered in birth is based on made-up stories? I'm happy to join your podcast. as an alternative viewpoint, as will many, many other mothers who again now feel unheard and dismissed. So then the podcast goes on then talking about epidurals and when an epidural might be recommended. So yeah, that's all good information. But then the discussion moves into women being forced. This idea that women could be forced into having an epidural. And I'm not sure where that came from. And if this is tied to this original statement that Dr. Aif made that women are being, forced to do things they don't want to do or aren't being listened to and are being disempowered. So, and there's a comment here that from Dr. Aif's partner says, nobody is going to essentially assault you with an epidural needle. So I think in this respect, that's absolutely correct. I have not heard of any woman being forced to have pain management that she didn't want. So I think if we're talking about women being ignored or women being disempowered, it has nothing really to do with pain management as far as I can see. But let's talk to the mothers who are coming into that hospital and being told they must have continuous monitoring. They must have an induction. And can we talk about inductions in this particular hospital? So if Dr. Aif is presenting an unbiased, evidence-based discussion or opinion on what's happening in Irish hospitals, you might need to look in your own backyard first before you make any statements like that. Here's what I find quite ironic. So here we have two senior members of staff at the Rotunda claiming that disempowerment of mothers is not happening. So it's not happening in Irish maternity units, and it's certainly not happening in the Rotunda. And yet, only a couple of years ago, the Rotunda published, I believe, the first piece of research on birth trauma in Irish maternity units. And Rotunda reported, I think, an 18% rate of birth trauma. Now, we're not saying that, I'm not trying to say that birth trauma and disempowerment are the same thing, but there are absolutely links. So as I've said, I have offered to come on the podcast and present a balanced view, present the opposite argument, because both things can be true. Women can be having great experiences, and obviously there are women who are not. There are women who are disempowered in labour. So instead of replying to my response, this is what it posts. So I have offered to join the podcast, or I would suggest Dr. Aif invite some mothers onto his podcast who haven't had the best experiences. I mean, that would really be a really positive exercise in reaching out to women and actually letting women feel like they're being heard, because based on this podcast, it's all rosy in Ireland right now. It's all rosy in the labour ward. But my midwifery colleagues tell me otherwise.
You are pretty much involved in all different kinds of labour deliveries and things like that, but you're not sort of directly involved in the obstetric end. In the obstetric end.
Literally.
Yes, but you do observe a lot of it. There's this increasing notion going on around now that women are disempowered when they go into hospital, that the decisions for their birth are stripped away from them, that they are told what to do, and that they have to oblige. And unfortunately, this narrative is getting louder and louder and louder.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your take on it, being an observer that's sort of in the thick of it, but not really.
Your question is, what's my take on the increasing rates of intervention, is it?
No, not that.
No.
The sense of the decision-making process.
Okay.
About the decisions around labour. Our mums listen to. Our mums involved in the conversation.